The twin suns of Vareth Prime burned like angry gods in the golden sky, and beneath them, the desert stretched endlessly in every direction, broken only by jagged rocks and the skeletal remains of ancient riverbeds that had not known water for centuries. Kira Voss could feel death creeping closer with every breath she took, and the air that entered her lungs was hot enough to scorch her throat, making each inhale a small act of torture that reminded her she was still alive. Though perhaps not for much longer, her survey shuttle lay in ruins behind her, a twisted mass of metal and shattered glass that had once been her home among the stars. And now it was nothing more than a grave marker waiting for its occupant to stop breathing. The crash had happened 3 hours ago, or maybe 4, because time had become a strange and slippery thing in the heat, and Kira could no longer trust her own mind to keep track of such simple matters. Her environmental suit had torn during the impact, and the precious water reserves that should have kept her alive for days had spilled into the hungry sand, disappearing so quickly that she had screamed in frustration and despair. Now she lay against a boulder, its shadow offering the only mercy this world seemed capable of giving. And she watched the suns crawl across the sky with eyes that were growing dimmer by the hour. She thought about Earth and its blue oceans that covered most of its surface. And she thought about how she had taken water for granted her entire life, drinking it whenever she wished, bathing in it, watching it fall from the sky as rain. What a fool she had been. And what a cruel joke it was that she would die on a world where water was more precious than gold or diamonds or anything else. The universe could offer her emergency beacon was working. She knew that much, and somewhere out there among the stars, a rescue ship was surely racing toward her position. But the mathematics of the situation were simple and brutal. She had hours to live, and the rescue ship was days away. And no amount of hoping or praying would change those numbers into something more favorable. Kira closed her eyes and prepared herself for the end, making peace with the fact that she would die alone on an alien world, far from everyone she had ever loved. But then she heard footsteps in the sand, soft and careful, and approaching from somewhere to her left. And she forced her eyes open because curiosity is a hard thing to kill. Even when death is close, what she saw made her wonder if she had already died, and this was some strange vision. Her brain had created in its final moments. A figure stood before her, humanoid but clearly not human, with pale blue skin that was cracked and weathered like dried clay, and large dark eyes that held a sadness deeper than any Kira had ever seen. The alien was old. That much was obvious from the way she moved and the lines that covered her face like a map of sorrows. And she was thin in a way that spoke of hunger and hardship endured for far too long in her hands. She carried something that made Kira's heart ache with longing, a small vessel shaped like a teardrop, made from some kind of crystal that caught the light of the twin suns and scattered it into rainbow fragments. The vessel contained water. Kira could see it sloshing gently inside, and her cracked lips trembled at the sight of it. The alien knelt beside her, moving slowly and carefully as if her bones might break from too sudden emotion. And she studied Kira's face with those deep, sad eyes. "You are dying," the alien said, and her voice was soft and musical despite the harshness of the world around them. "I can see it in your skin and in your eyes, and in the way your chest struggles to rise and fall." Kira tried to speak, but her throat was too dry, and all that came out was a rasping sound that barely qualified as human. The alien nodded as if she understood perfectly, and then she did something that Kira would remember for the rest of her life, something that would change the course of history for 2 entire species. She unstopped the teardrop vessel and pressed it gently to Kira's lips, tilting it so that the water inside began to flow into her mouth. And Kira drank greedily because she could not help herself, because her body demanded survival, even when her mind knew the cost. The water was warm and tasted slightly mineral, but to Kira, it was the sweetest thing she had ever tasted. Better than wine or honey or anything else she could name, she drank until the vessel was empty, until every last drop had passed her lips. And only then did the full horror of what had just happened crash over her like a wave. "No," Kira whispered. Her voice returned now, but filled with anguish. "No, that was yours. That was all you had. I can see it in your eyes. Why would you do that? Why would you give it to me?" The alien smiled. And it was the most beautiful and heartbreaking smile Kira had ever seen. "My name is Seleth," the alien said. "And on Vareth, we have a saying that has been passed down through countless generations since the time when rivers still flowed across our world." She reached out and touched Kira's face with fingers that were gentle despite their roughness. "Water shared is a soul remembered," Seleth said. "I am old and my time grows short no matter what I do. But you are young, and your story is not yet finished. So let my final act be something worthy of remembrance." Kira grabbed the alien's hand and held it tightly, and tears began to flow down her cheeks. Precious water escaping from her body, even as she desperately wanted to give it back to this stranger who had saved her. "I will remember you," Kira said fiercely. "I swear to you on everything I am and everything I will ever be. I will remember you and what you did here today." Seleth settled down beside her in the shadow of the boulder, and together they waited for whatever would come next. The rescue ship arrived 3 days later, descending through the golden sky like an angel of mercy, and the crew found Kira alive but barely conscious, her arms wrapped around the body of an alien woman who had died sometime in the night. They had to pry Kira's fingers loose one by one, and she screamed and fought them because she had promised to remember. And letting go felt like the first step toward forgetting, but she never forgot. Not for a single moment of a single day for the rest of her life. She carried Seleth's teardrop vessel with her always. And she carried the memory of those sad, dark eyes and that beautiful, heartbreaking smile. And she carried a debt that burned in her chest like a second heart. A debt that she swore the entire human race would help her repay. 6 months had passed since Kira Voss had watched Seleth die in her arms beneath the twin suns of Vareth Prime. And in that time, she had not rested for more than a few hours at a stretch. Driven by a fire that burned inside her brighter than any star, she had learned everything there was to learn about the Varadi people, reading every report and study and ancient record she could find. And what she discovered had broken her heart all over again. The Varadi were an old species, far older than humanity, and their civilization had flourished for thousands of years when humans were still learning to make fire and hunt with sharpened sticks. They had built great cities and created beautiful art and developed philosophies that explored the deepest questions of existence. And they had done all of this on a world that was slowly dying beneath their feet. Vareth Prime had not always been a desert, the records showed. And once it had been covered with vast oceans and mighty rivers and forests that stretched from horizon to horizon, but their sun had grown hotter over the millennia, and the water had begun to disappear, evaporating into space or sinking deep underground where no one could reach it. The Varadi had adapted as best they could. But adaptation can only take a species so far when their entire world is turning to dust around them. Now fewer than 80,000 Varadi remained, scattered across the planet in small tribes that wandered from place to place, chasing the last underground springs and fighting over water rights with a desperation that would have seemed barbaric to their ancestors, and the galaxy had forgotten them. That was the part that made Kira angry enough to scream. The part that kept her awake at night and drove her to work harder than she had ever worked before. The Varadi had been members of the galactic community for centuries, but they had never asked for help because their pride would not allow it. And no one had bothered to offer because no one really cared about a dying species on a dying world with nothing valuable to trade. They had simply been abandoned and ignored. left to fade away like a candle burning down to nothing in an empty room. Kira refused to let that happen. Not after what Seleth had done for her. Not after she had held that old woman's body in her arms and felt the weight of a debt that could never be measured in credits or resources. So she had come to the United Nations Interstellar Council, the governing body that represented humanity among the stars. And she had demanded an audience. Now she stood before them in the great circular chamber where the most important decisions affecting the human species were made. And she looked out at the faces of the most powerful men and women in human civilization. They looked back at her with polite interest. The kind of expression people wear when they are being diplomatic but do not really expect to hear anything that will matter to them. Kira took a deep breath and began to speak. 6 months ago, I was dying on Vareth Prime, she said, and her voice echoed through the chamber, strong and clear despite the trembling in her hands. I had crashed my shuttle and lost all my water, and the rescue ship was days away. And I knew with absolute certainty that I would not survive. She held up the teardrop vessel that had not left her side since that day. Then a Varadi woman named Seleth found me, and she was old and frail and had almost nothing left to her name except for this vessel and the water it contained. The council members leaned forward slightly, their interest becoming genuine. She gave it to me, Kira said, and her voice cracked, but she pushed through. All of it, every single drop, even though she knew it meant her own death. Even though I was a stranger and an alien, and someone she had never met before. She let the silence stretch for a moment, letting them feel the weight of what she was saying. When I asked her why, she told me a Varadi saying that has been passed down through generations since before humans existed as a species. Water shared is a soul remembered. Kira gripped the vessel tightly. She died in my arms 3 days later, and the first held her body until the rescue ship came. And I made her a promise that I intend to keep. She looked around the chamber, meeting every pair of eyes she could. The Varadi are dying. All of them. Their entire species, their entire civilization. And they have been dying for centuries while the galaxy watched and did nothing. Her voice rose with passion. They could have asked for help. They could have begged or pleaded or demanded. But they did not, because they are a proud people who would rather die with dignity than live as beggars. She stepped forward. But we are not Varadi. We are human, and we do not wait for people to ask for help when we can see them suffering. We do not turn away from those in need, because they are too proud to admit they are drowning. The chamber was completely silent now. Seleth gave me everything she had, and she did it without hesitation or expectation of reward. She did it simply because it was the right thing to do. Kira's eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. We have oceans, entire worlds covered with water, and we have technology that can move asteroids and change the atmospheres of planets. And we have the power to save an entire species from extinction. She held up the empty vessel like a holy relic. The question is not whether we can help the Varadi. The question is whether we are worthy of what Seleth did for me. The question is whether humanity has the courage and the compassion to repay a debt that we never asked to owe. She lowered her hand and looked directly at the council president. I am not asking you to do this for political advantage or economic gain or strategic positioning. I am asking you to do this because it is right. Because one old woman on a dying world decided that a stranger's life was worth more than her own. And because we should be the kind of species that answers that sacrifice with everything we have. The council deliberated for 9 hours, while Kira waited outside the chamber, pacing back and forth and refusing all offers of food or rest when the doors finally opened and the council president emerged. Kira searched her face for any sign of what had been decided. The president smiled, and it was a smile that held both pride and determination. We have voted unanimously, she said, to authorize Project Seleth, the largest humanitarian terraforming initiative in human history. Kira's legs gave out beneath her, and she would have fallen. If the president had not caught her, "We are going to give them oceans," the president said softly. "Because that is what humans do. We remember our debts, and we pay them back 1,000-fold. And somewhere in the great beyond." Kira was certain that an old woman with sad dark eyes was smiling. Elder Torvash had lived for 112 years on Vareth Prime, and in all that time he had learned one truth above all others. That hope was a dangerous thing that could destroy a person faster than thirst. Never could he had watched his parents die when he was young, and he had watched his wife die when he was middle-aged, and he had watched countless friends and neighbors and strangers die throughout his long life, all of them taken by the endless thirst that defined existence on this cursed world. So, when the first human ships appeared in the sky 18 months ago, he had felt nothing but suspicion and fear. Aliens had come to Vareth before, merchants and scientists and curious travelers, and they had all looked upon the Varadi with the same expression, a mixture of pity and relief that they themselves had not been born on such a terrible world. They had taken their samples and written their reports, and then they had left, returning to their comfortable lives on worlds where water fell from the sky, and no one had to watch their children cry from thirst. But these humans were different, and that difference terrified Torvash more than anything else ever had. They did not leave. Instead, they kept coming. More ships every day, hundreds of them filling the sky like a swarm of metal insects. And they brought with them machines, the likes of which Torvash had never seen. Great towers rose from the desert floor, reaching toward the heavens like the fingers of giants. And the humans called them atmospheric processors, and said they would pull water from the very air itself. Massive platforms were constructed in the deepest craters and the most barren valleys. And the humans said these would catch the ice asteroids they were bringing from across the stars. Ice asteroids. As if such a thing could be real. As if anyone could simply reach into space and grab a mountain of frozen water and drag it across light years to drop on a dying world. Torvash did not believe any of it, and he told his people as much, warning them not to get their hopes up, because hope was a killer just as surely as the suns that burned overhead. But the humans kept working, day after day and month after month, and they never seemed to tire or lose their enthusiasm. And they never once asked for anything in return. That was the part Torvash could not understand. The part that kept him awake at night, wondering what trick was being played on his people. Nothing in this universe was free. He knew that. So what did the humans want? What would they demand when all their work was done? What price would the Varadi have to pay for this supposed gift? He had to know. He could not bear the uncertainty any longer. And so he demanded a meeting with the human commander. Her name was Chun, and she was a weathered woman with gray hair and kind eyes, who had apparently been leading military and humanitarian missions for longer than many of his people had been alive. She welcomed him into her command center, a temporary structure filled with glowing screens and bustling workers. And she offered him a seat and a glass of water that he refused because he would not drink their water until he understood what they wanted. "You wish to know why we are here," Commander Chun said. And it was not a question. Torvash nodded stiffly. "You wish to know what we want from your people. What payment we will demand. What strings are attached to all of this?" Again, he nodded, impressed despite himself that she understood so clearly. Commander Chen reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device, pressing a button that caused a holographic image to appear in the air between them. Torvash gasped, because he recognized the face that floated before him. The pale blue skin and the dark eyes and the gentle smile. "This is Seleth," Commander Chun said. "She was a member of your species, an old woman who had almost nothing left to her name except for her dignity and her compassion." Torvash stared at the image, his heart's pounding. 80 months ago, one of our people crashed on your world. A young woman named Kira Voss, who would have died from thirst if not for Seleth. Commander Chun's voice was soft but steady. Seleth found Kira and gave her the last of her water. Every single drop, even though she knew it meant her own death. And when Kira asked why, Seleth told her that water shared as a soul remembered. Torvash felt something hot and wet sliding down his cheeks, and he realized with shock that he was crying. That tears were falling from his eyes for the first time in decades. He had not cried since his wife died. He had believed he had no tears left, but here they were, streaming down his face as he listened to a human tell him about the sacrifice of a stranger he had never known. That is why we are here, Commander Chun said. That is what we want. Nothing more and nothing less. She stood and walked around the table to stand before him. Seleth decided that one dying human was worth everything she had left. And we are here to return the gesture, not because we expect anything in return, but because that is who we choose to be. Torvash tried to speak, but his voice would not work. So Commander Chun simply placed a hand on his shoulder and let him cry when he could finally form words again. He looked up at her with eyes that had been old and tired for so long, but now held something new, something fragile and terrifying and wonderful. You are truly doing this, he whispered. You are truly going to save my people. And you want nothing from us. Commander Chun smiled. We want you to live, Elder Torvash. We want your children to grow up on a world where they do not have to fear the thirst. We want your grandchildren to swim in rivers and your great-grandchildren to look up at clouds in the sky and think that such things are normal. She squeezed his shoulder. We want to repay a debt that can never truly be repaid. But we are going to try anyway, because that is what Seleth deserves. And that is what your people deserve, and that is what we want to be as a species. Torvash rose from his chair and did something he had never done before in his entire life. He embraced a stranger, wrapping his thin arms around Commander Chun and holding her tightly while he wept. Thank you, he said, over and over again. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And Commander Chun held him back and let him cry until he had no more tears left to give when Torvash returned to his people that night. He gathered them together under the light of the moons and told them what he had learned. We have been forgotten by the galaxy for so long, he said. But we are not forgotten anymore, and the humans have come not to take from us, but to give. And they ask nothing in return except that we live. His people stared at him in disbelief. And he understood their doubt because he had felt it too. I know it seems impossible, he said. I know hope has hurt us before, but I have looked into the eyes of their commander, and I have seen the truth there. And the truth is that they are here because one of our own showed them what compassion looks like. And they are answering that compassion with everything they have. He raised his arms toward the sky where the human ship still moved and worked. So let us hope again. My people, let us believe again. Because the rivers will remember what the humans are doing here, and so will we. For all the generations that come after us, and for the first time in 400 years. The Virati allowed themselves to dream of water. The child's name was Mira, and she was 7 years old. And she had never seen a cloud in her entire life. She had heard stories about them from the elders, of course. Tales passed down through generations about a time when great masses of white and gray would drift across the sky, blocking out the suns and bringing shadows that moved like living things. But those were just stories. The kind of thing old people talked about when they were feeling sad and nostalgic. And Mira had always assumed that clouds were like the monsters in the scary stories. Things that existed only in imagination, so when she looked up at the sky on the morning of the 3rd year of Project Seleth and saw something strange happening, she did not know what to make of it. The golden sky that had been her constant companion since birth was changing, darkening in patches, as if something was spreading across it, like spilled water across sand. She called for her mother, pointing upward with a trembling finger. And her mother came running with fear in her eyes, because any change on Vereth was usually a change for the worse. But when her mother looked up and saw what Mira was pointing at. She did not scream or run or pull her daughter to safety. Instead, she fell to her knees and began to weep. "Clouds," her mother whispered, and the words sounded like a prayer. "Those are clouds, my daughter. Those are real clouds in our sky." Myra did not understand why her mother was crying. But then she felt something touch her face, something small and wet and cool. And she flinched because she did not know what it was. Another touch, and another. And suddenly, the air was full of tiny drops of water falling from the sky, landing on her skin and her clothes and the dry ground around her. "What is happening?" Myra asked, her voice filled with wonder and a little fear. "Why is the sky crying?" Her mother laughed through her tears and pulled Myra into her arms. "The sky is not crying. My love, the sky is giving us a gift. This is rain. This is what our ancestors used to see every season before the great drying began. Rain." Mira thought, and the word felt strange in her mind, like something from another world entirely, but she liked the way the drops felt on her skin, cool and gentle and somehow loving, as if the sky itself was reaching down to touch her all across Vareth Prime. The same scene was playing out in 1,000 different places. Varathi of all ages were emerging from their shelters and looking upward. Their faces turned toward the darkening sky as the first drops began to fall. Old ones who had never dared to hope they would see this day wept openly, their ancient bodies shaking with sobs that had been held inside for decades. Young ones who had only known the endless thirst stared in confusion and then delight as they realized what was happening. Parents held their children up toward the sky, letting the rain wash over their little faces, wanting them to remember this moment for the rest of their lives. And then the drizzle became a downpour. The rain fell harder and faster, streaming down in sheets that soaked everything and everyone. And the Varathi did not run for cover. They did not hide from this unprecedented assault of water from above. Instead, they began to sing. It started with one voice, an old woman somewhere in the capital. And then another voice joined her, and another. And soon thousands of Varathi were singing together, their voices rising above the sound of the rain. The song of waters returned, a hymn that had been passed down through countless generations, even though no one had ever believed they would have reason to sing it. The words spoke of gratitude and joy, and the blessing of water falling from the sky. And they had been preserved for 400 years by a people who refused to let go of the dream, even when the dream seemed impossible. Now, that dream was real. And the song that had been a lament for so long became a celebration. Kiravas stood among the Varathi in the capital square, the rain streaming down her face and mixing with her tears until she could not tell which was which. She had returned to Vareth 6 months ago to oversee the final stages of Project Seleth, and she had known this day was coming. The scientists had predicted it with great accuracy. But knowing and seeing were two very different things all around her. The people she had worked so hard to save were singing and dancing and crying, their pale blue skin glistening with water that fell from a sky that had been empty for centuries. A hand touched her shoulder, and she turned to find Elder Torvash standing beside her, his old face transformed by a smile that seemed to take years off his age. "You did this," he said, and his voice was thick with emotion. "You and your people. You gave us back the sky." Kira shook her head. "Seleth did this," she said. "Everything that has happened, everything that is happening right now, it all started because one old woman decided that a stranger's life was worth her last drop of water." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the teardrop vessel that she still carried. "Everywhere, I am just trying to be worthy of what she did. And so is every human who worked on this project." Torvash placed his hand over hers, both of them holding the vessel together. "She would be proud," he said. "Wherever she is now, whatever comes after this life, she would be proud of what her sacrifice has become." The rain continued to fall, harder than ever, and the Verati continued to sing. And somewhere in orbit above the planet, human engineers and scientists watched the data streaming across their screens and cheered Commander Chun, stood on the bridge of the flagship, a cup of coffee forgotten in her hand as she watched the clouds spread across a world that had known nothing but clear skies and burning suns for 400 years. "We did it," someone said behind her, and she turned to see her second-in-command staring at the screen with tears in his eyes. "We actually did it." Chun nodded slowly, feeling a lump in her throat that made it hard to speak. "This is what humanity can be," she said, finally. "This is what we choose to be, not conquerors or exploiters, but healers and givers and friends." She set down her coffee and straightened her uniform. "Send a message to Earth. Tell them the rains have come to Varath Prime. Tell them that Project Seleth is a success. And tell them that Seleth's soul is remembered." The message traveled across the stars at the speed of light. And when it reached Earth, the celebration began there. 2 people gathered in public squares to watch the footage from Varath, to see the Verati dancing in the rain and singing their ancient song. And many of them cried because there is something beautiful about watching hope reborn and back on Varath. As the first day of rain began to fade into the first night of rain, Kira stood alone on a hill overlooking the capital and held Seleth's vessel up toward the sky. "I kept my promise," she whispered into the rain. "Your soul is remembered, and your people will live. And this is only the beginning." She liked to think that somewhere beyond the clouds, beyond the stars, beyond everything she could see or understand, an old woman with sad dark eyes was smiling. The rains had come to Varath Prime, and nothing would ever be the same again. The Velthari Dominion had ruled the stars for 12,000 years, and in all that time, they had never once feared a younger species. They were collectors of worlds and collectors of peoples, taking whatever they wanted from whoever they wanted, and no one in the galaxy had the power to stop them. Their ships were massive, dark things that blocked out the light of suns. Their soldiers numbered in the billions. Their empire stretched across 3 spiral arms, and every species that had ever challenged them now existed only in museums and memory banks. So when a Velthari scout vessel detected a small human research ship drifting near the edge of explored space, the crew did not feel excitement or curiosity. They felt only the dull satisfaction of predators who had spotted easy prey. The human ship was called the Wandering Star, and it carried only 4 souls. Dr. Elena Vasquez was the mission leader, a xenobiologist who had spent 15 years studying alien life forms. With her were 3 crew members: pilot James Chun, engineer Maria Santos, and security officer David Okonkwo. They had been mapping an unexplored nebula, collecting samples, dreaming of the discoveries they would bring home. They never saw the Velthari coming. The scout vessel dropped out of faster-than-light travel only 3,000 kilometers away. Before James could even reach for the emergency beacon, an energy pulse had disabled every system on the Wandering Star. The lights went out, the engines died, and the ship began to drift in the cold silence of space. Elena remembered grabbing the edge of her console as the artificial gravity failed. She remembered Maria screaming something about the reactor. She remembered David reaching for his weapon, even though they all knew weapons would not help them now. Then the airlock exploded inward, and the Velthari came aboard. They were tall creatures, standing nearly 3 meters high, with gray skin that looked like stone and 4 arms that ended in razor-sharp claws. Their eyes glowed a pale blue, and when they spoke, their voices sounded like metal scraping against metal. David fired his weapon. The plasma bolt struck the lead Velthari in the chest, and for one brief moment, Elena felt hope surge through her heart. But the creature simply looked down at the burn mark on its armor and made a sound that might have been laughter. Then it moved, faster than anything that Sai should be able to move, and David was dead before his body hit the floor. James tried to run. He made it 3 steps before a Valkyrie claw caught him across the back. Maria never even had the chance to scream. She died trying to shield Elena with her own body, and her sacrifice bought Elena exactly 2 seconds of life. But those 2 seconds were not meant for escape. A Valkyrie officer stepped through the carnage, its blue eyes scanning the scene with cold intelligence. It looked at Elena, at her small human body trembling against the wall, at the tears streaming down her face, and it spoke in broken but understandable English. "You are the leader of this vessel, yes? You are the scientist?" Elena could not find words. She could only nod, her eyes fixed on the bodies of her friends, her family, the people she had laughed with and worked with and loved for 3 long years. "Good," the officer said. "The Sovereign Collector will be pleased. We have been seeking a human specimen for study. Your species is new to us, and we wish to understand your biology." Specimen. The word cut through Elena's grief like a blade. They did not see her as a person. They did not see any of them as people. To the Valkyrie, humans were just animals to be collected, studied, and discarded. She felt something change inside her in that moment. The fear did not disappear, but something else rose up beside it. Something hard and cold and patient. Something that whispered in the back of her mind, "Remember this, remember everything, and survive." They bound her wrists with energy cuffs and dragged her through the broken airlock into their ship. The corridors were dark and cold, lit only by strips of pale blue light along the floor. She saw other Valkyrie watching her as she passed, their strange eyes tracking her every movement. Some of them made sounds that she realized were comments about her appearance. They were mocking her. They were laughing at how small and weak she looked. Elena kept her head down, but she was watching, learning, remembering. She counted the turns they took, estimated the distances between sections, noted which doors required security codes and which opened automatically. She did not know if any of this information would help her, but she gathered it anyway, because gathering information was what scientists did. They took her to a cell deep in the heart of the ship. It was small, barely large enough for her to lie down, with a hard metal bench and a drain in the floor that she did not want to think about. The energy field that served as a door hummed with a sound that made her teeth ache. Before the Valkyrie left, the officer turned back to look at her one final time. "Your species is alone out here," it said. "No one knows what has happened to you. No one will come looking. You belong to the Dominion now, human. The sooner you accept this truth, the easier your existence will be." Then it was gone, and Elena was alone in the darkness. She sat on the metal bench and wrapped her arms around herself, shivering from cold and shock and grief. She thought about James and Maria and David. She thought about their families back on Earth who would never know what happened to them. She thought about her own mother, who had begged her not to take this mission, who had said the frontier was too dangerous. But even as the tears fell, that cold, hard thing inside her refused to break. It whispered to her in the silence, "They made a mistake. They think you are nothing. They think your people are nothing. But they are wrong." Elena did not know how she knew this. She did not know what Earth could possibly do against an empire that had conquered thousands of worlds. But deep in her bones, in the same place where humans had always known things they could not explain, she felt the truth of it. The Valkyrie had taken her, and for that mistake, they would learn what happened when you harmed something that belonged to humanity. She wiped her tears, lifted her head, and waited. Somewhere out there, among the stars, her people would come. She did not know when, and she did not know how, but she knew they would come. Because that was what humans did. They came for their own, no matter the cost, no matter the distance, no matter the odds. And when they came, the Valkyrie would finally understand why the universe should have feared the children of Earth.